It takes a lot to surprise me, but this had me spitting out my afternoon coffee. Reform UK aren't just the biggest political party in the country now, they are an astonishing 4 points ahead of Labour. Reform are on 27 points, Labour 23, and the Tories biting their dust on 21 points. This is unprecedented and sets the stage for Nigel Farage in number 10. The Americans had their political revolution in November with the re-election of Donald Trump, but mark my words, whilst we will have to wait 4 years in this country, a revolution is coming here as well. Let's just put this into some sort of context. Whilst the Conservative Party is almost 200 years old, Reform has been a political entity for just 5 years, and Nigel Farage, its charismatic leader, has only been in post for 7 months, having decided just days before the election in July to re-enter frontline politics. With no party infrastructure, no big budget for posters and leaflets, no army of activists to get the message out there, Reform UK managed to accrue 4.1 million votes. That is 500,000 more than the Liberal Democrats. Now, due to our perverse electoral system, first past the post, the Lib Dems have 72 members of Parliament, whilst Reform have just 5. Now, the optics of such a small number of MPs in the Commons wearing the Reform turquoise colours perpetuates the illusion that this is a fringe movement made up of cranks, crackpots and nut jobs. Up until now, the political establishment just don't get it, with figures in the Labour Party characterising Reform UK as somehow far right, a label that's now used for everything, including knitting, working out in the gym, mathematics and the countryside. And the complacency of the Tories has been truly awe-inspiring. Having suffered the worst defeat in their history last year, there are many in their ranks who still think that we're living in a two-party system and who consider the Tories to be the natural party of government. The media have been similarly dismissive of Reform UK, treating Nigel Farage as some kind of outlandish political specimen whose views are vulgar populism at best and hateful xenophobia at worst. But just as 80 million Americans who voted for Trump can't all be anti-democratic redneck thugs, so the 4.1 million Brits who backed Farage cannot be demonised as a hateful rump, a small minority, bad people with the wrong views. In fact, it's my view that those 4.1 million people are just the tip of the iceberg. Reform only have to double the number of votes they win at the next election, very easily done, and they won't be far off the number of people that voted Labour and gifted Keir Starmer an undeserved supermajority. And why are Reform UK now the biggest party in Britain? Well, because they're picking up votes from both of the main parties, who are sick of the entire political establishment. Traditional working class voters have had enough of a Labour Party that feels like it's run from North London for North London. Millionaire champagne socialists, quite happy to punish voters with net zero insanity, which wins them brownie points at their posh dinner parties, and which comes with huge costs that they can afford, but which Labour's traditional grassroots cannot. Net zero is anti-working class. It's an idea more bourgeois than chocolate containing sea salt and chili. Net zero is more bourgeois than posh paint with names like white cotton. How can a paint be cotton? Net zero is more bourgeois than keeping flower petals in a bowl of water. What's that all about? Traditional working class Labour supporters have had enough of woke political correctness, of being told that a bloke in a dress is a woman, and they've had enough of the progressive left talking this country down, with endless apologies for things like slavery, which we famously ended. Traditional working class Labour supporters voted in their millions for Brexit and want to start seeing the benefits. They want an end to unchecked mass migration, which is putting downward pressure on wages, overwhelming our infrastructure and creating imported competition for resources. Plus, they're fed up with communities living parallel lives, not speaking the language, often not working, and sometimes, in the case of the grooming gangs or the weekly so-called peace marches, ignoring the rule of law. These folks are fed up with our broken, divided society and the loss of what it means to be British. Meanwhile, Tory voters have had enough of a Conservative Party that isn't conservative anymore. One that under Boris Johnson saw legal migration of almost 1 million people in a year. Now, a shock new report has found that Johnson's decision in 2021 to allow skilled workers to bring dependents will have cost the UK almost £35 billion by 2028. 35 billion. And the thing is, a lot of people are not convinced by Kemi Badenoch's claim to be anti-woke, given that it was over 14 years of rule that the madness of gender ideology, pronouns and diversity officers in the NHS all took place, all on the watch of the Tories. Not to mention illiberal, ruinous and failed lockdowns and vaccine and mask tyranny. The Conservatives created a gap in the market by saying one thing, let's get immigration down to the tens of thousands, and doing another, bringing it into the millions. Now, for reform to be this far ahead is quite extraordinary, and it spells doom for the establishment political parties, because reform now have 4 years to spread their message, to build a party structure, to create a movement and to recruit an army of supporters with boots on the ground. They have the support of the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, who may well hand over $100 million to Farage. And that could be a drop in the ocean in terms of the amount of funds that this party will accrue. The allure of reform and of Farage can be summed up in one word: change. Now, that is a political cliche that gets thrown around at every election. But with Donald Trump's absolute blizzard of executive orders that have already seen so much action in the White House, closing the border, declaring there are 2 sexes, to name but 2 issues, so the public here are beginning to realise that in reform and in Farage, real actual change is possible. Now, it's a huge burden for Nigel Farage, a guy I know well, who, let's not forget, just a year ago was swallowing testicles in the jungle on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. He now has the burden of expectation. If he carries on at this rate, he will have a mandate to change Britain, and change it he must. What's he got to do? Well, he's got to create an efficient, low-tax economy, making Britain a global hub for investment and enterprise. He's got to shrink the size of the state so that we can live within our means and allow the private sector to deliver the efficiencies and innovation that you just don't get from public institutions. We've got to aim for 3, 4, 5 or sod it, 10% economic growth. If America and China can grow at that rate, why not us? Farage will have to eradicate poisonous, toxic and divisive leftist groupthink in the public sector, like primary or elementary schools where children are being asked if they're a boy or a girl today, or where history is being taught as something to be ashamed of rather than to be proud. Reform have the perfect backdrop: a disastrous socialist government who in 6 months have tanked the economy, clobbered businesses with costs and red tape, waged war on aspiration with a heartless tax raid on farmers and private schools, and left pensioners shivering in their homes. Whilst just a few weeks ago the Conservatives may have been debating whether they would ever work with reform, the question now is whether reform will ever work with them. Why should they? Reform UK are so unstoppable, they may not need the support of the Conservatives. You heard it here first, folks. They could win this outright. Brace yourselves for Prime Minister Nigel Farage. This is not a drill. Thanks for watching. Now, to see the whole show, ad-free and uncensored, plus bonus material, head to my Substack at markdolan.com.